Most of Paul's letters open with warm greetings and thanksgiving. Galatians doesn't. It opens with a gut punch. I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you. No pleasantries, no warmth. Imagine getting a letter from your mentor, and instead of dear friends, it starts with I can't believe you. That's Galatians. Paul was furious. And the reason reveals one of the most important debates in early Christianity. To understand Paul's rage, we need to understand what was happening in Galatia. Galatia sat in Central Asia Minor, modern Turkey, named after Gauls who migrated there centuries earlier. Paul had founded several small house churches in the region, all entirely Gentile. Gentile means non-Jewish. These communities had no Jewish members, and the letter was a circular letter and designed to be passed from one house church to the next. These were small, isolated groups, far from Jerusalem, far from Paul, and deeply vulnerable. After Paul left, other traveling teachers arrived. They may have been Jewish followers of Jesus or Gentile converts who had adopted full Jewish law observance. Either way, the argument was devastatingly logical. It went like this. You worship the God of Israel. You claim Abraham as your spiritual father. You follow a Jewish Messiah. So why wouldn't you follow Jewish law? Circumcision, kosher food laws, Sabbath observance. These were the markers of belonging to God's covenant people. The rival teachers said, you're halfway in, come all the way in. This wasn't a trick. It wasn't deception. It was a genuinely compelling argument that made perfect sense within a Jewish framework. And that's exactly what made it so dangerous. Paul saw this not as a minor disagreement about religious practice. He saw it as a fundamental betrayal of the gospel itself. He called their teaching a different gospel, not a variation, not an alternative interpretation, but a perversion. For Paul, the stakes were total. If these teachers won, everything he'd built and everything he believed about Jesus would collapse. So how does Paul fight back? With a brilliant two-part strategy. He structures his entire letter deliberately. Chapters 1 and 2 establish his credentials. Chapters 3 through 6 build his theological argument. Credentials first, theology second. And this wasn't random. Paul knew that before anyone would accept his ideas, they had to accept his authority to speak, and his authority was under direct attack. Here's the problem Paul faced. He was not one of the original 12 apostles. He never walked with Jesus during his earthly ministry. His opponents used this against him. They likely claimed authority from the Jerusalem apostles, Peter, James, and John, and dismissed Paul as a secondary derivative figure. Their version of the authority chain went, Jesus passed his teaching to Peter and the Jerusalem leaders who passed it to them. Paul, just a subordinate branch. Paul's counter was bold. He claimed he received his gospel directly from a revelation of Jesus Christ, not from any human being. He even described a confrontation with Peter in Antioch to prove he stood as Peter's equal, not his subordinate. A common misconception, Paul's authority was obviously accepted by everyone in early Christianity. It wasn't. His apostolic status was genuinely contested. The fact that he spends 2 full chapters, nearly half the letter, defending his credentials before making a single theological argument tells you everything. If his authority were secure, those chapters wouldn't exist. With his credentials established, Paul makes his theological move. He starts with a phrase his audience would have recognized, Gentile sinners. In Second Temple Judaism, the categories were clear. Israel stood inside God's covenant, righteous by definition. Gentiles stood outside, sinners by definition. And this wasn't necessarily a moral judgment. It was a covenantal status. If you were born outside Israel, you were outside the covenant. Period. The boundary between righteous and sinner was the boundary of Torah observance. Paul flips this entire framework. Even Jews who follow Jesus, he argues, have recognized that justification, being made right with God, doesn't come through works of law. Works of law means observance of Jewish legal requirements, circumcision, kosher rules, Sabbath. Justification comes through faith in Christ. Paul redraws the boundary. The dividing line is no longer Torah observance, it's faith in Christ. Jews and Gentiles stand on the same side. Then comes the knockout punch. If justification comes through the law, then Christ died for nothing. One critical clarification: Paul was not anti-Jewish. He was not attacking Judaism or dismissing the law's value. He himself remained Jewish his entire life. His argument was specific. Gentiles do not need to become Jewish to belong to God's people. The issue was the boundary of God's people, not the words of the law itself. And then this wasn't just ancient theology. This debate shaped the future of an entire religion. If the rival teachers had won, following Jesus would have meant becoming Jewish first, accepting circumcision, kosher laws, Sabbath observance as prerequisites. Paul's argument opened the door for a universal movement that didn't require ethnic or legal conversion. The next time you read Galatians, notice the structure. Credentials first, theology second is a model of persuasion under pressure. And at its core, it's a question that still echoes across every community and institution. What does it mean to belong, and who gets to decide?